Hello everyone and welcome to this barely scripted tutorial on how to transcode ProRes RAW footage into normal ProRes or DNX MXF. What we'll also take a look at is how to create a look inside Scratch and also how to export that look as a lookup table to be used in other applications. Okay, so first things first, let's go to the system settings, to the advanced tab here, and look for color management and disable the color management in Scratch. This will make a few things much more easy and straightforward for new users. So let's do that, hit OK and create a new project. I'll call that ProRes RAW, hit create, set our media directory here, and the default image format settings, I will leave them just as is to 1080-24, but we'll get back to that in just a bit. Okay, I'll hit OK and enter the project. Now you will start at the construct tab down here, and in the construct what you do here is mainly organizing. So you import footage, you conform footage, you create timelines, and possibly delete them again, stuff like that. So if I go to the import clips menu here, select my ProRes RAW folder, also make sure select folder here is enabled because I want to import the complete folder, hit open, and now Scratch is asking me whether we want to change the frame rate, resolution or aspect of our timeline and the project settings. No, in this case we do not. So now the footage is in, and we can inspect it by selecting it and swiping to the right, bring up the metadata stack, and here we have all the metadata that ships with the files to look at. All that metadata, by the way, will also be exported along with the ProRes files that we render out of Scratch. Now before we get to the Edit and Color Effects tab, let's first actually look at the Render tab. What we have here is the main output node, and that's basically our timeline, and the settings of this node are our timeline settings. So right now our timeline is set to 1080-24, but our clips, this one for example, is actually much bigger. It's a 5.7K clip. So I can dial that in manually by setting this to, I don't know, 4K, or I can just dial in whatever I need to here, 5780. But there's a much easier way to do that. I can just grab one of these clips and drag them down here onto this label, and as you can see, now my timeline resolution, and with that also the resolution of this main output node, are updated to exactly what the clip's dimensions are. Now as you can see, I have clips of different resolution in here. We'll get rid of the two clips here in the beginning in just a bit. Okay, so now let's quickly take a look at the edit menu. We won't do much here in the editor because we're not here to edit footage. We just want to transcode it and possibly dial in a nice look to use in other applications. So let me get rid of the metadata stack here, and the two most important hotkeys in Scratch are Alt and drag up down here in the viewport to zoom like this, and space drag to position the image. In the top menu bar here you have several tools, most importantly the scopes, which I will leave to the waveforms now, but we also have a histogram here, we also have a vector scope and a curves display. Now in the Edit tab you can obviously edit if you want to, and do basic framing, audio syncing. If you have conformed a timeline from Premiere or Final Cut or Avid, you can load a reference file here to compare your conformed edit with. That's all nice and fine, but we're today not here to do that, so let's jump to the Color Effects tab. Inside Color Effects, again, you have a version stack to create different versions of your grade. We'll cover that later. And also you have access to the metadata stack to look at the metadata of each clip. And in this tutorial, we'll focus on the 9 menus up here. You can obviously enable the layers panel here and create layers. They grow from top to bottom, and use all the secondary tools like the canvas, which is in other words a power window, or the qualifier, and so on. But today we'll keep it rather simple, work without layers, and only do a primary grade with the first 9 menus up here. Because also whatever you dial in here in balance, primary, numeric, curves, vectors, or loading a LUT in the LUT menu, all these parameters can be translated into a lookup table that you can export from scratch. But before we get to do that, let's first take a look at decoding our clips. So as you can see here, we're looking at a very log image. Why is that? If you go to the QuickTime menu here, we find all the debayering settings for ProRes RAW. And right now, since this clip originates from a Zcam E2 F6, it goes straight to Rec 2020 and Panasonic Vlog, as per Zcam's recommendation. If we look at other clips, for instance, this one over here is a bit smaller than our timeline right now. This has been recorded with a Canon EOS C300 Mark II, and hence by default goes to Cinema Gamut and Canon Log 2. However, if I want to have all my footage in the same, let's say, starting place, I can just select Rec 2020 here and Panasonic Vlog, and now have this clip also go to these color spaces straight through the debayer. Now I can also change the next clip, which is actually from a Panasonic camera, and goes straight to Panasonic V-Gamut. So let's set this also to Rec 2020. And these settings here are always clip by clip. Same goes for ISO, Kelvin, and tint that I can dial in here. However, once I set it up the way I like it and I want to apply it to all other clips in my timeline, what I can do is hit copy here and then right away paste it, and now enable everything I want to paste. In this case, I don't have a grade or anything, but just the node controls, which means these controls here. And I can not only paste them, but I can paste them forward to all clips following this clip. However, there's an even more convenient way to do this, and I'm going to show you that because it's an incredibly powerful tool inside Scratch. Back to the construct. What I can do is just Control A, select all the clips in my timeline, and open up the media browser. The media browser is your friend whenever you want to do batch operations, change something on multiple clips at once. So in the base tab here, for instance, I could change the name, or I could give these clips a real ID. Let's say these are, I don't know, all clips from day 1. So I could do day 01, hit set, and now that's the real ID for all my clips. I can also use metadata. For instance, Avid, for instance, likes to have the source clip name as the real ID. So I can type in hashtag S name for source name, hit set, and now the real ID shows the source name of the clip. I could even, for other purposes, truncate that by say 7,4. What does 7,4 mean? 7 means skip the first 7 characters, which is SAGINF underscore, and then make the whole string 4 characters long, S001. If I now hit set, I only get S001 in there. And I have a whole lot more metadata items that I can just select from this dropdown. We have the grade tab, which allows us to load a source or input LUT or a grading LUT for all selected clips. The files tab, if I have moved files on file browser level and I have to relink them. The audio tab, we can do audio sync. Let me skip to the metadata tab, which allows me to display and also change all the metadata again with all these hashtags that we have available here. And now the node menu is the exact same menu that we just saw in the color effects tab. However, in color effects, this is really clip by clip. In the media browser, this now would apply to all selected clips, which are all clips of my project as of now. So I could go to, for instance, let's say Alexa White Gamut and Array Lock C. And now all my clips are debayered to that color space with that gamma function. Okay. Oh, and by the way, thanks to Ruven from the Zcam E2 group for providing this fantastic footage. Looks really nice. Okay, so now we have our footage in a lock space and we want to render everything out. So let's jump to the render tab. Here's our timeline. Oh, and maybe let's quickly clean up our timeline. As you can see, we have different resolutions in here. We can obviously render them at their native resolution. Actually, let's do that. Let's keep this mixed timeline and render it out just same as source, at the same resolution, frame rate, etc. So what I can do is to this output node attach a new node called, let's say, ProRes encoder. And every node in Scratch has its own settings. So if I go here to the format settings of the ProRes encoder node, I can select my ProRes flavor that I want to render to. Let's say in this case, I have 422HQ is fine. I also want to enable 4 audio channels that ship with the clip. And yeah, we're basically there. Note that you also have this ProRes encoder on Windows inside Scratch. And now what we can do is hit the same as source button. Because if we would just render this node, it would all render as is in the 5.7K resolution, which means all the clips in our timeline that are smaller than 5.7K, like this one, they would be rendered exactly like this, with letter and pillar boxes around them, which we don't want, obviously. So in this case, you have to choose same as source. And that means that Scratch will render all the files out in their native resolution, unscaled and unshifted. We can choose the folder and also whether we want to make files unique. You actually only need that if you have the same clip appear twice in your timeline, which you usually do not if you're just transcoding a whole bunch of files. So this would be fine, just hit OK and then Scratch would start rendering. However, let's look at a more practical example, and for this I'll just grab the bigger 5.7K files here, grab them, add a new timeline, drop them in here. Okay, and again, grab one of these clips, drop it down here to make the timeline be 5.7K as well. And now let's build a more sophisticated output tree. For instance, let's say we want to scale everything down because we want to transcode stuff to H.264 for web review. What you can do is just add a transformer node and now set this node to HD 1080-23. Here we go. However, as you can see, we're now just creating a center crop from the full 5.7K image. So again, the transformer node as well has its own format settings where we can set the scaling to fit width. As you can see now, the image is scaled down to HD. What we can also do is add a burn-in behind it, like such. And if I now double-click this node, you will see that I'm now back in color effects, but the timeline is yellow, and this indicates that I am on an output node. Now every change I do here will apply to the full timeline, all the shots in there. And what I can do is add burn-in file name, double point. Maybe let's make this just a little bit bigger, just for you guys to see, and hashtag as name to show the actual file name, or timecode is TC for source timecode, and so on. I can freely arrange these text fields. I can create a new text field and type in property of Matze and put that down here, center it, and I can even dial in the opacity. So now I have sort of a watermark here. Okay, and again, I have all these metadata items. I can even choose from the metadata of the actual ProRes clips. Oops, here. So I can burn in what color temperature they have, what gamut they have been recorded in, and so on. I can burn all that into the image if I need to. Back to our render tree. So this is our burn-in, and what's missing is the H.264 encoder. Okay, this will render 1920 x 1080. In the format settings, I can dial in bitrate, also audio channels if I want, and things like that. And now let's quickly take a look at the file naming. Because right now, as you can see, I would render a clip that's called timeline2.transform.burnin.h.264 encoder.mp4. That's not what I want. By default, the output file name is the same as the node's name, and the node name is in here. So I could choose to change that, my output h.264, but I can also just click the output file name here, which says hashtag name right now. I can write in anything else, online review for instance, or I can, oops, go away, or I can choose other hashtags like the source name for instance. Now the thing is, if I choose my timeline name, here we go, my timeline currently is called timeline2 up here, Scratch will render one big file called timeline2. However, usually you want to render separate clips. How to do that? Very simple. Let me remove timeline2 and instead use the source name and insert that. Now the source name changes from clip to clip, right? So we have take 14 here, take 7 here, take 18 here, and 38 here. The source name obviously changes from clip to clip, and if you use that for your output file naming here, so will the output file name also change from clip to clip, and hence force Scratch to render separate files, which is, well, not as easy as just checking a checkbox, I know that, but it's much cooler because you can combine it. You can also add, let's say, an underscore and add a new hashtag like the date or the target resolution 1920 x 1080, or you could even create a folder, let's say online review, and make a slash. And now Scratch will create a folder called online review and render in all the files based on their source file name. And obviously I can also create folders based on other things, on other hashtags like, let's say, the date again. Make a slash, and now I have Scratch creating a folder with the current date and rendering all the files based on their source file name in there. Alright, now that I have created such a nice file mask, I can just save it here as my file mask template and add it. Okay, and maybe instead of the small HD files, I also want a ProRes encoder in the native resolution 5.7K, and maybe also a Avid DNX encoder. And if I click inside here, I can just recall my file mask template, apply it, do that, and same here. If I happen to want the same, the same template for these files as well. And now I can add any output node that I want to the queue, like such. And if I look here in the render queue, I can start that queue and it will start rendering out in the background actually. However, before we do that, we also wanted to talk about creating a look and exporting lookup tables. So let's quickly do that. And for that, I will duplicate my timeline just by alt dragging it. And now go to the second timeline. Let's quickly rename that to looks. And yeah, let's maybe choose this clip. Bring it down a little, and now let's dial in a little look. We have a few tools here. In the media menu, we can load a source lookup table if we want. In the framing, we can do framing, surprise. But the grading mainly takes place here in the balance menu and the following menu. So let me bring down offset a little to put the blacks down, stretch the image up a little, just like that. Something like this. This should be good contrast wise. On the primary menu, I can refine this with lift, gamma, and gain. Something like this maybe. By the way, you can hold down J, K, and L to highlight the color wheels and then click and drag across the image to maybe create a more slightly cooler look, something like this. It's not too bad. In the numeric menu, we have again offset, pregain, lift, gamma gain, and a few more parameters, but in a numeric form. The way you change values in Scratch is by clicking them and then circling around them, like such. Just like turning an encoder. It's a pretty cool way of modifying numeric values. If you hold down Shift while doing so, it goes much slower, as you can see. So let me increase the saturation quite a bit. Okay, now we're done, and we can look at the curves. Obviously, we have the normal hue versus the normal luminance curves, but we also have hue versus hue. So I could shift blue against pink or red if I wanted that. And also we have hue versus saturation. For instance, in this image, I'm quite happy with the green tones, but the blue seems to be a little bit too saturated, so we could just bring it down a little. You can actually have this much easier if you enable the pick function and you click inside here and you just drag down. Something like this. The vectors tool works very similar. For instance, I could grab blue here and desaturate it this way, or shift it towards green, or shift it towards pink. You can get pretty decent effects here. Let me reset that. And if I want, I can still load a lookup table on top of my look. However, right now I want to export this look that I dialed in here as a lookup table. So how do I do that? Go to settings, and here in the general menu, I have my export settings for the LUT. Now, choosing a 10-bit 3D LUT with a size of 33 is usually what should work in pretty much any application or camera. But to be sure, just read up what your application or camera of choice expects and dial it in here. And once done, just hit save. Let me go to my desktop. Here we go. And not save it as a CCR, that's Scratch's own format, but save it as a 3DL or Cube LUT. Choose 3DL, hit save, okay. And now we can just check our lookup table. How do we do that? We display the version stack over here by swiping to the right, add a version of the clip, and reset the whole thing, just like that. So now there's no grade on it. However, I am already in the LUT menu, so let me hit load. Let me go to the desktop and load the lookup table that I just saved. And now I can see the effect of that LUT and compare it to the original clip that I graded before. I can jump back and forth, and as you can see, the image is pretty much the same. What I can also do, let me get rid of the scopes, move this to the middle, hit S on my keyboard. Now I'm in split view, and I can just drag and drop the other clip with the grade on it here onto the right side. You don't see a difference, but it is certainly there. And now I can just wipe one version against the other and see, well, our lookup table does exactly what it should do. Reflect the grade that we dialed in previously. Now let's look at this clip. Maybe we can dial in a more a warmer look that is not as contrasty. just do something like that. In the numeric menu, I'll dial in some S-curve. Yeah, something like that. Display the scopes again real quick. Right, make it warm. Something like that. And also increase the saturation a little. Okay, and in the curves, increase the saturation of the sky a little. The blues a little bit more saturated. Something like this. I'm fine with that. And now again, let's hit save. It's already set to 3DL. Save this one. And we have another LUT saved, which we can use in any other application or camera. Don't forget that the base, the input for this LUT, is then, in this case, Alexa white gamut and Arri log C, because that's what we've debayered the clips to. So this is what the lookup table now expects. If you want to use the lookup table in your Panasonic camera or in your Z-Cam, then you should obviously choose a different starting point, like Panasonic V-Gamut or Rec 2020, and a different log curve as well. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to download a copy of Scratch. It's free until end of October, and if you have any questions, just shoot an email to support@assimilating.com. They're happy to help you. Alright, well then, have a good day. Bye.